And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment here at the Western Journal. Joining me on my left is Olivia Brown. She is on the assignment team at the Western Journal. And joining us from California via some sort of super fancy satellite uplink is Cameron Arcand. He's a freelance writer who helps us at the Western Journal from time to time, and his expertise is limitless, boundless, and unfathomable. We're glad to have you here on Friday afternoon. Lots going on in the news today. You've seen Facebook has announced how long they will ban Donald J. Trump from Twitter. We've got all sorts of other interesting things going on, things in the Biden administration. We have picked out 4 things, though, that you might not have seen in the news yet that we want to talk with you about. So coming up on the show, we're going to be dealing with the Capitol incursion, the cost of it, and we're going to weigh that against the cost of the BLM George Floyd riots that took place last year. Remember the mostly peaceful riots? Well, we're going to put those in context here in just a few minutes and talk about how the media has covered this and how Democrats really have spun it. We're also going to be talking about Sephora, the makeup company, and some allegations of, I think, racism over there, perhaps, and maybe these actually are right. We don't know. And on top of that, we're also going to be talking about some sports, a little bit of volleyball and what's happening there. That's going to be from Olivia, and then Cameron is going to take over and tell us about the latest California socialistic scheme to try to stop the state from bleeding residents. We're looking forward to that. It is a straight-up redistribution scheme, and we're looking forward to hearing about that. First, though, we want to talk with you about some numbers. Now, yesterday, there was a shooting in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis area. U.S. Marshals were trying to bring in a suspect. The suspect reportedly had a gun, reportedly wouldn't respond to commands from the officers, and reportedly would not drop his weapon. And officers ended up shooting him. That sparked riots overnight in Minneapolis, believe it or not, the place where so many of these riots have centered in the past. That got us thinking about costs of the riots. Another thing that happened yesterday was released the estimate of how much it cost, how much the Capitol incursion cost, how much damage was done there as measured in dollars. And it looks like that came in at about $1.5 million. The incursion, some called them protests, some called it a riot, some called it an insurrection. It's unclear to me how it could be an insurrection. I don't think anyone has been charged with or convicted of insurrection yet. But anyway, that was the talking points from the left. The total cost for it ended up being about $1.5 million. Well, there was a study released back in September of last year that you may have missed. A lot of people missed it. It tried to tally up the damage that was done across from all of the riots that took place after the George Floyd shooting. That estimate came in at somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. $1 and $2 billion, billion with a B. That is, depending on how you slice it, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 times as expensive as the Capitol incursion on January 6th.
That's wild.
That's wild. Now, remember, the media painted the riots as mostly peaceful. That's still one of my favorite moments from the news last year. I think it was either CNN or MSNBC, I think, who had a reporter standing in front of a vista of burning buildings and cars, fires in the background. And I don't know if he wasn't aware of it. He should have been aware of it because they picked their live shots pretty carefully. But while on air, he talked about how the protests, remember, the protests are mostly peaceful. You could also say the riots were mostly peaceful, because it turns out a lot of them were riots, and turns out they were not peaceful. So contrast that against the stories of insurrection that came out of January 6th, where it's, as far as I can tell, no one tried to set up another government. No one tried to take control of the government. There were a whole lot of people taking selfies. Someone sat in Nancy Pelosi's chair and took her mail, which I think is a federal offense. But the media made that look like an unbelievably imminent threat to democracy itself. And they continually tried to play down the George Floyd riots. And again, 1.5, we're going to say $1.5 billion in damage there versus $1.5 million in damage as far as the Capitol incursion goes. So, Olivia, let me ask you this. How do you explain the difference in the way the media covered those two events?
Well, the two different things is that, one, the George Floyd riots were based off of race. It has to do with Black Lives Matter, which the media has continually decided to side with, despite seeing all the anger and violence going on. But also, Donald Trump was, speaking at the same time that the January 6th started. And so what they've done is made Trump responsible for this. And so anything that Donald Trump does in the eyes of the media is bad. And so that is going to be hounded upon over and over and over and over again, just because Trump, the right, conservative, whatever you may call it, even though I believe most of it was Antifa. There were a few there, but it's really important to look at what is the media's narrative with this and who are the people in play.
Who are the people involved in this? What is the narrative? The narrative was always, the narrative from the left has been that America is corrupt. America was founded on slavery. That's the whole purpose behind the 1619 Project. And the left has picked that as their way to delegitimize America because the left truly despises America. Now, we're not talking about every Democrat out there. We're not talking about every liberal out there, but we are talking about the left in general. The people on the left absolutely despise America because, for two reasons. One, America has always fought against leftism and has tried to stand as a bulwark for freedom. The left is about state control. And two, America demonstrates how profoundly wrong leftist theory is. If Marx were right, if the left were right, America would have failed. The proletariat would have risen up and overthrown the bourgeois elite. That has absolutely not happened, and it turns out the system America uses has lifted more people out of poverty in the last 50 years than the entire world economy had in the 500 before that, the previous 500 years. So America is a threat both practically in terms of trying to stop leftism from spreading, and then theoretically as well because we show how foolish leftism is. Cameron, I can't see you right now. Can you hear me? You can. So Cameron is right now a disembodied voice in our studio, which is fine. I generally think of Cameron as a ghost-like figure, so that works very well. Perhaps wraith-like even. So that works well. He's back. There he is. So Cameron, what do you make of the differential in damage costs, the difference in damage costs, and the difference in the way the media treated the events?
oh, well, this was our side, so we have to kind of like own this in a sense. I think there's different ways that this was um, covered, and I think both of the long-term consequences of both of these events need to be analyzed. But the stuff that happened last summer, it seemed like once it stopped, everyone kind of forgot about it. But we're still talking about January 6th in June 2021. And I
So,
think that's a big issue.
yeah, so part of me wonders if the reason that people stopped talking about the Floyd riots after they stopped, I wonder if I think the left and the media probably breathed a sigh of relief. I mean, how many nights can you stand up in front of a burning building and say, oh, nothing to see here? It's like Leslie Nielsen in The Naked Gun, every fireworks going off in the background, and he's standing there saying, nothing to see here, nothing to see. Is that why they got quiet afterward? Were they really secretly glad that the riots they had helped foment were over?
I think so. I think they realized they probably created a beast. I would say the people who were kind of at the top of this kind of realized what might have happened. You kind of saw that with a lot of mayors and stuff. They tried to either at first they were like, we need this to stop, but then they kind of tried to downplay the violence afterwards. I think that was honestly something that was really concerning. And one thing I'll also say too, I'm realizing that my answer to your last question might have not exactly been super clear with that, but I think a big issue is we don't talk about the impact that those riots had on the Black community afterwards. We don't talk about what
Yeah.
that did to Black-owned businesses. And what kind of confuses me is there was a lot of fundraising and stuff afterward to help those businesses that were destroyed. But you also had a lot of people who were like, oh, well, these businesses have insurance. We don't need to worry about these sorts of things. And that's same mentality. One thing that changed with 2020, and it's a really concerning development, is the fact that between that and COVID, we haven't learned that people's livelihoods are their lives in a lot of cases. And we saw that with the lockdowns. We saw that with the businesses that were destroyed, where people aren't understanding that the things that people are passionate about, their work, things that they use to feed their families, are an important aspect of their lives. And this is something that this narrative keeps being perpetuated by people who quite honestly are in my age group. They're in Olivia's age group too, where we're basically maybe not able to make that connection. I don't know if it's because a lot of people our age aren't working or working to the full extent. They aren't starting families. They aren't doing these things to see the full consequences of what they're putting out there. If anyone was on like any social media platform or had any conversation with these people, they were full on justifying violence and destruction. And at the same time, you ask them, well, what do you want done about it? I asked a few people that. They weren't giving a coherent answer. And I remember I spoke to one girl who was posting all this stuff trying to justify all the violence that was going on. And I had to explain to her that, hey, I want police reform too, but the Democrats are blocking police reform. And I was trying to explain the fact that we had bills from Tim Scott and Rand Paul that Democrats in Congress were blocking from going in because they thought it didn't go far enough. But what the hell were the Democrats in the Senate doing?
Yeah,
They weren't doing anything.
Yeah, and then Rand Paul was ignorantly attacked, and had the authorities not been there, I think he probably would have been actually beaten by a bunch of protesters who had no idea that he was trying to push the police reform that they claim is vital. We're running overtime on this topic, but I want to ask Olivia one quick question before we leave. Olivia, why? Cameron made a fantastic point. Is the fact that Democrats seem to care more about the narrative than about the people crushed by these riots and protests whose livelihoods were destroyed? Is that not just endemic of the left in general? They care about ideas. they could not care less about the people those ideas affect.
Yes, definitely, because I remember a lot of these businesses that were affected were actually Black-owned businesses as well. They were rioted on as well. And let's not forget David Dorn, who was attacked. This was a Black man who was attacked. And nobody from the left talked about it because he was conservative. And so it's really, really important to remember those names and remember they're always pushing a narrative with whatever they do. And it shows how much little they care about human life.
Yes. And, the thing right now that they originally loved covering AAPI violence against Asians. And then they got shy about it when it turned out a lot of the people committing violence against Asians were Black. And now Andy Ngo has posted these unbelievably brutal pictures of himself after he got beat up by one of these crowds. And I've not seen any major, I don't know if Fox has touched it. I haven't seen it there. I've certainly not seen it in any other major news outlets. They do not care about violence. They don't care about individuals. All they care about is the ideology, and the ideology essentially ends with power going to them. We've got to move on quickly. Olivia, you're up next. You have got a split topic today, and I don't know which one you're going to start with, so I'm just going to toss it straight to you. Volleyball or makeup, Olivia?
Volleyball. So
volleyball.
Cameron actually brought a great point. He was talking about he didn't know why people in our age group were so uninformed. To me, I immediately thought it's our universities that are pushing this into us, and specifically the University of Oklahoma. We saw Kylie McLaughlin. She was a volleyball player there, and she had to deal with indoctrination and standing up for her own beliefs, and she had to deal with cancel culture. The two things I'm going to be talking about today are cancel culture. If you want to put up her photo, that would be great. Yeah, so this is Kylie, and what she went through is that her coach made them watch this film called 13th, 2016 documentary, which really takes shots, as they use the word in the lawsuit, against Donald Trump. They, accuse him of, they compare it to the beatings of blacks in the 1960s.
So it's political propaganda.
Political propaganda. It's about the incarceration of blacks. They talk about critical race theory. And what happened is that Kylie said, I'm not okay with this. And she got basically kicked off her team. They gave her options of you can either transfer to another school and lose your scholarship, or you can take a, let me see how they said it, a redshirt year. I was not a sports person, excuse me. A redshirt year, that's where she'd keep her scholarship but not be able to play. So she essentially lost the thing that she loved because of speaking out about this. And now she, just as of today, is launching a $75,000 lawsuit against these coaches because they branded her as a racist. They said she was homophobic. They said all these, awful things about her. And so cancel culture is so just in the left. The next one I'm going to be talking about, and these two really go together, and they've just happened within the last week. If you want to pop up the next one as well. So I don't know if everybody in our platform is familiar with Amanda Ensing. She is awesome. She is a conservative Christian beauty creator, and she had a line with Sephora and worked together with Sephora as one of her partners. And what happened to her is she spoke out about the differences between the right and the left. She did a tweet that was talking about, the left is embarrassed of America and the right wants to defend the Constitution. And, January 6th was brought into play with that because she was talking about the differences between the right and the left. Yeah. And what they did is they went and they said, if you can pull this one up now too, the interesting thing with Amanda, when she launched this lawsuit is she had a whistleblower inside Sephora come to her and say, this is what they were saying about you. Another executive came out and said, here you can see Deborah Ye. She was the marketing director. She is the person that sent out a memo saying we're no longer going to be working with NSYNC because of her racial posts and that she made light of January 6th, which NSYNC is saying, I never made light of that. Never, 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 never. And so cancel culture came against her as well. She lost her job with Sephora. And so that has hurt her so she's suing her for defamation. So we're seeing two different suits coming out of cancel culture. My question for you, Josh, is cancel culture ever going to end?
Well, I mean, I guess it has to, because eventually everyone's canceled, right? I mean, that's the problem with viewing life and history as a matrix of victims and victimization is that eventually everybody is both a victim and a victimizer, right? Young people essentially can victimize the old because they're stronger and they have longer to live. Older people can victimize the young because they're richer and have more wisdom. Short people can't reach things on tall shelves. Tall people can't get in small spaces. I mean, there's no matter what the stupidest example you can think of, there's variance among human beings. So we're all different, and we all have advantages and disadvantages that place us in positions over or under other people. So, eventually at the end of the day, I hope it will be shown for what it is, which is just absolutely ridiculous. The things that are getting canceled are getting stupider and stupider. The idea that you would cancel a woke person, I presume that Sephora VP, I think you said it was, I presume she's pretty woke.
Yes,
so the idea that she would
definitely.
cancel a black person for not acting like she thinks every black person should act.
Yeah.
I mean,
She's Latina.
That's pretty ridiculous. Okay, so
NSYNC is Latina.
So she's Latina. So they have a higher employment rate than blacks do in America. So she victimizes blacks. It's the cancel culture thing is just endless. That's why it doesn't work. That's why intersectionality doesn't work. And eventually, what should happen is the intersectionality people should realize the ultimate minority is the individual. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of a foundational building block of Western ideology and Western culture. But as Jordan Peterson says, they will get there if they just don't kill us all in the process. And I don't know if they're going to kill us all in the process or not. I think cancel culture has to come to an end eventually, because either everyone will be canceled or the ridiculousness of it will become so weighty that no one can take it seriously.
Yeah. Cameron, my question for you, is there anything else that could have been done in either of these cases to prevent a lawsuit happening, or is it just that, the other side is just too ignorant?
Well, I'll say this because you mentioned the first one at a university. I graduated high school yesterday, and I go to a very liberal high school, and a lot of stuff that I noticed throughout my experience there is there are times where I would voice my opinion about things. Sometimes it would go over not well. Sometimes it would go over perfectly fine. If they wanted to avoid a lawsuit, they should have just let her state her opinion, and then they should have moved on. Like my last few weeks of senior year, I had to watch a Michael Moore documentary for my English class and take notes on it. And then in our yearbook, I sent you guys the comparison between Trump and Biden now making national news, and just lectures about. I've had teachers go on long lectures that are clearly very partisan. It's all over the place, and it's really just kind of encroach really into public schools and all universities and institutions as a whole at this point. But in order for them to avoid a lawsuit, they need to let the people who will disagree with them disagree. Otherwise, they are going to keep getting slammed with lawsuits until pretty soon the schools won't be able to do anything about it. So I definitely do applaud that girl for taking legal action on this. I think the more legal action that does get taken with individual institutions, the more that they'll leave room for people to share their different opinions. I don't think it will become more of a politically neutral environment. I just don't think that's possible at this point. But I think we'll probably hit a point where if we sue enough, they'll keep their hands off. But obviously, that's not going to protect people from like the social part of it, which is cancel culture, getting slammed on social media, social isolation, and all that other good stuff that the left loves to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. So Cameron, I want to stick with you, and you're out in California. You just graduated from high school. Congratulations, by the way. And you are getting closer and closer to starting up real life, and a part of real life for folks in America at least used to be getting a home. California has an enormous problem, though, in that housing prices are so high. It's essentially impossible to be poor in California, at least near the cities. That's an enormous problem. But the great social engineers in California think they have come up with a way to fix that. Tell us about it, Cameron.
Yeah, so state lawmakers are coming up with a plan to taking different steps to help disparities between different races of Californians, different income levels of Californians. But there was one in particular that should very much alarm anyone who is a fan of private property. So we have some of the highest cost of living here in the state, and state lawmakers are proposing this program which would allow for the state to own up to 45% of your house. So what this would do is, let's say you're a low-income Californian, you see the housing prices here in the state, you don't necessarily want to leave. If you're making under a certain amount of money, you would be able to apply for a program like this, and your end of the bargain would be, hey, you get to live in this house. Their end of the bargain would be, we own almost half of it. And that's not a small percentage either. That's 45%. Now, a big concern about all of this is this really prevents people from truly being homeowners, and it gives the government a massive edge over you to eventually use against you. I know if anyone's concerned about eminent domain, this essentially gives them a lot more leverage to do something like that because they'll own part of your house. This completely targets lower income Californians as well. So it's one big, like you said at the beginning of the show, distribution scheme. And I kind of wanted to ask Olivia this: what do you think is probably the best solution to handle high cost of living, and why is this idea in particular so problematic?
With that is such a good question. My first question before I answer yours is, with this house owning 45%, would they be able to kick a person out of that house with the government owning it?
They haven't worked out those details yet, but if they own that big of a percentage, it's unclear what kind of laws they would be able to pull at that specific point. So this is something that is still a work in progress, but their whole thing is, we will own up to almost half your house.
That's wild. Back to your question, with the high cost of living, I used to live in California. I know it well. It's interesting now living in Arizona. The difference every time you cross over into the state, you can see that the gas is always higher whenever you go there. Even though we're bordering states, everything is more expensive there. Houses, just as you said before. But what I'm thinking is, between these two places that I'm in, and even the difference between seeing, Trump and Biden with gas prices going up now in Arizona significantly than they were before, I'm thinking more of this is it's California's been overrun by Democrats, and I think that's really the reason that we are having high cost of living now.
So
The policies by Democrats.
Right. So they pass policies that are, for some of them, that are truly well-meaning. For others of them, they're just interested in pushing kind of a leftist bent. But yeah, there are lots of policies that increase the cost of living there. That means that salaries have to rise. As salaries rise, people are able to afford larger homes. Then, of course, home prices will go up to meet the supply and demand. And
But they won't
then
cut property taxes. They won't do it. They
Do
will
what?
never do. They'll never cut property taxes.
Oh yeah.
They just
Really,
go
you
up.
want to help people immediately slash property taxes, but you're exactly right. They will never do it, and it's a disincentive to own a home, which is sad. Normally, that's the biggest investment most people make. It's certainly the largest tangible investment most people make their whole lives, and it discourages that from happening. It also discourages you from putting down roots. And, in the old days, there was a reason why they had landowners, why landowners were the ones who were allowed to vote. They were the ones who were there and had the biggest stake in the community. And to the extent that the federal government discourages home ownership, they're discouraging people from having skin in the game. I'm working this out in my head right now as we're talking, and I'm trying to understand the difference between this and essentially like Section 8 housing. Is it just another form of housing welfare? How do you apply for it? How do you get approved? This, that, and the other. What happens if you bail out on your obligation? If you just leave in the night, is the government stuck with the rest of your mortgage? Can the government boot you out if they decide they want to? I mean, there are an enormous number of really kind of interesting and potentially scary questions that go along with this. It is a classic kind of liberal response. The government has created an enormous problem, so they are taking more action to remedy the problem, which will also create more problems. It's kind of a Randian, we talk about Gordian knots. It's kind of a Randian knot. She used to talk about those things. Olivia, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, is this sort of like a loan? Would you ever be able to pay off your home and fully own it? Or is it for the rest of time they own 45%? Because say when you buy the house, you don't have as much money, but say you get a better paying job and in a couple years you could be able to actually pay for the home's price. Is the government ever going to be taken out of the home? Can you ever earn back that percentage?
Do you get locked into it? Is it the case that you can't leave? So mobility is locked down. Now that's a very interesting thought right there, actually, because California is just bleeding people left and right. If there were some clause in there that attached you to the home, I'm sure that would be useful for the tax base. But it would be an enormous problem as far as personal freedom goes. Cameron, you don't happen to know that, do you? I know this is still being talked about and negotiated.
Yeah, they're still being talked about, but I'm looking at my moving box down here as you mentioned that I'm out of here at the end of the month. But it's just no one's staying here anymore because there are conservative solutions to these problems. They could tell we have so many housing developers out here, it's insane. Yet if they told some of them, hey, we'll give you a tax credit if you decide to build apartments that don't cost $2,000 a month, we'll help you guys out too. They won't do stuff like that because they want their tax revenue so they can line their own pockets.
There's an enormous problem with, look, even if you have no ideological disagreements with the left, who in the world thinks that the government is the best manager of money out there? The government's notoriously bad manager of money.
You can see that with all our debt.
Yeah. Look at it. None of us, I forget who made the point, it was years ago. It's like, no family in America can live the way the American government lives. If you ran your family that way, you would be out on the street. So do we really want, let's put ideology aside, do we really want the government to be the one figuring out, to be increasing taxes, taking that money in, and then figuring out where it goes? We absolutely do not. All right. That is, we're a little bit over for today. Thanks for sticking with us. We appreciate it. Thank you, Cameron. Thanks for tuning in. Congratulations again on graduating, and good luck moving. Tell us quickly, are you moving out of California?
Moving out of California, my parents wanted to pick it up and move it to Nashville first. And then, so I'm spending the summer there, and then I'm moving to Arizona.
Nice.
Awesome. Welcome.
No, Tennessee, another state with no income tax. It's super appealing, tax-wise, super appealing state, and that's why these places are growing. All right, that is going to be it for us. We're just about out of here for the weekend. We hope you are too. We hope you have a wonderful weekend. Use it to get rested up, renew yourselves, get refreshed, and ready to do this again next week. The fight against the left never stops, and we will be here over the weekend and then into next week fighting right alongside you. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. That'll make sure that you are subscribed to us. After you do that, a little bell comes up. You can click that bell. That's going to make sure you get notified whenever we go live. No shadow banning for us. Additionally, we thank you for watching. We thank you for reading the Western Journal's articles. If you feel like partnering with us to fight the left in a more substantial, more active way, there are several ways you can do that. If you visit westernjournal.com/join, that's westernjournal.com/join. There are ways you can partner with us to help sponsor our journalism to fight back against the left and what it's trying to do to America. That is it for us this week. We will be back with you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. For Western Journal Live, for the Western Journal, for Cameron, and for Olivia, I'm Josh Manning. Thanks. Have a great weekend.